guys, Ron here, and this one's a big one cause, well, this is my first top 10 video in many months, but more significantly, we're gonna be counting down the most important Pokemon that have ever existed. Now, that doesn't mean the best Pokemon nor the most popular, although a lot of these are very popular, more like all of them actually. These are iconic Pokemon, but with a purpose. They help make Pokemon more popular, influential, and accessible. Without these Pokemon, we wouldn't be here. Okay, we would, I'm exaggerating a bit. We'd still exist, but you know, it wouldn't be that much fun. Now let's begin with number 10. Jigglypuff. You know who it is, it's the balloon Pokemon herself. Nowadays, the only time you ever think about this Pokemon is when playing Super Smash Bros. With the boys. But back then, during Pokemania, this Pokemon represented something huge. Something that helped Pokemon reach the other half of the entire human population. That's right, women. Without this Pokemon, the perception would have been that all Pokemon were either masculine, gender neutral, or eggs and balls. But with Jigglypuff, it made it super safe for girls to enjoy Pokemon, because there was a feminine Pokemon out there too. Nowadays, there are more than enough Pokemon to show that Game Freak is catering to the female demographic as well, but if Jigglypuff didn't exist during Generation 1, I think it's safe to assume that Pokemon wouldn't have resonated with girls as much as it did. Because you know how it is as a kid, you'd be teased to Mars if you were caught playing with something that was perceived as belonging to the opposite gender. But Jigglypuff made it cool for girls to play video games and card games as well. Number 9. Butterfree and Beedrill. Nowadays, people doubt the importance of early game bugs, but back in the day, it was actually a genius move by Game Freak. Including these Pokemon was actually an example of smart game design. Encountering the Butterfree and Beedrill family, who were both version exclusives, taught people about leveling up and evolution in a short amount of time. Chances are, if Red and Blue were your first games, that Caterpie or Weedle were your first Pokemon to have evolved. And then Metapod or Kakuna taught us how you could gain experience by choosing a weak Pokemon first, and then switching out a stronger Pokemon to share the experience upon defeating your foe. And then when those Cocoon Pokemon evolved, we learned that Pokemon can evolve twice, and that there were some Pokemon that can only be obtained in other versions of the game. Now you finally understand why you have a butterfly and your friend has a bee. We learned so much about how the game worked by training one Pokemon, and that really helped make these games easy to grasp for kids. Number 8. Alakazam, and to an extent, Machamp. For all the relatively new Pokemon fans out there, how you doing? Hope you're enjoying your stay here at the online Pokemon community. But you may not know that Alakazam, aside from Mewtwo, was like the strongest Pokemon during Generation 1. Due to a glitch, the Psychic type was actually immune to Ghost type instead of weak to it. So the Gengar family was useless since it was weak to Psychic, what with its poison typing. There was no Dark type at the time to defeat Psychic monsters, and there were no strong Bug type moves. Alakazam was invincible, and it taught people about the power of choosing the right Pokemon, but most importantly, about trading, because in order to obtain one, you had to trade with a friend. What better incentive to find a pal than to receive the ultimate Pokemon and be unstoppable? Oh yeah, and you know, friendship and all that. But Alakazam though. Number 7. Greninja. He's the most popular Pokemon in Japan, at least 2 years ago, but that's not even close to the reason I think this Pokemon was important to the franchise. Before Greninja, it was almost 7 years since the last time Game Freak promoted a Pokemon so heavily, turning it into a superstar among all other Pokemon. There are longtime fans who don't like this practice and think that there are a ton of Pokemon that deserve more promotion, but for the franchise itself, this move had very positive effects. Game Freak and Nintendo knew that Greninja was appealing, so they allowed him to shine in cross-media games like Super Smash Bros. And most importantly, the anime. This Pokemon, coupled with the X and Y anime's boost in quality, brought a resurgence of interest to the anime. I've seen it with so many people I personally know. Greninja made it cool to watch Pokemon again, and for the fans that took a break during Gen 5, this Pokemon helped guide them back into the franchise and play Pokemon X and Y. And I don't think Delphox was responsible for that. Number 6. Lucario and Garchomp. You bet your sweet butt that the two most popular Pokemon in Generation 4 did some real good for the franchise. Lucario was the predecessor to Greninja, a Pokemon from later generations that even non-Pokemon fans knew about. Lucario helped people jump back into Generation 4 when they left during Gen 3. It's actually crazy how two of my favorite generations, Gens 3 and 5, are the ones most people took a break in. The reason both Lucario and Garchomp are here is because of competitive battling. After the physical and special split of Generation 4, Pokemon battles became deep and complex. We needed some Pokemon to showcase how important it was to choose special or physical moves at the appropriate times in battle. And who else but Lucario? A popular Pokemon with amazing physical and special attack. Both Aura Sphere and Close Combat were great tools to help us learn about the new metagame. And this was when even casual fans became interested in competitive battling, especially the older fans who left during Generation 3 and were looking for a much more complex gaming experience. Ultimately, Garchomp became the go-to Pokemon to use in battles and represented the world of Pokemon battling for many years. Number 5. Rhydon, and perhaps Lapras as well. Rhydon was the first Pokemon to ever officially be part of the franchise. While in the game, it doesn't seem so important unless you count being the icon to mammalian Pokemon and a bunch of statues to be super important. But behind the scenes, Rhydon was what gave Pokemon its identity. By the way, those statues have been retconned to not be Rhydon anymore. But Rhydon existed back when Pokemon was just an idea. Capsule Monsters features a lot of Pokemon before Pokemon was a thing, like Lapras and Blastoise. But even before Capsule Monsters, Pokemon were going to look even more monstrous. They were basically gonna be smaller kaijus like Godzilla and Mothra. But once Rhydon was created, it seemed to be the template or archetype for many Generation 1 Pokemon. Rhydon was a dinosaur-like mammal, and that's kinda what a lot of Pokemon from Kanto are. Without Rhydon, perhaps Generation 1 Pokemon would have had a completely different design scheme. Number 4. Ho-Oh, Togepi, and Marill. Even Snubbull and Donphan if we must. These were never before seen Pokemon shown in a generation before their debut. Of course this happens every generation, but this was the first time. When these Pokemon made cameos and even became part of the cast, fans knew that Pokemon wasn't just gonna be a fad. It gave us hope that Pokemon would continue on forever, and there's no evidence that it will end anytime soon. We saw Ho-Oh in the first episode of the anime, but at the time, kids didn't know better. It could have just been one of the legendary birds. But once Togepi hatched, things got serious. In a good way. No longer were there 151 Pokemon. From then on, we always knew that the Pokedex was infinite, and that immersed us in the franchise even more because there was no limit to the regions we could explore. From then on, there were always more Pokemon to discover, and that feeling is indescribable. Number 3. Mew. Mewtwo is pretty cool, but he's not as mysterious as Mew. In fact, here's the story of how Mew single-handedly quadrupled Pokemon's sales and ensured Pokemon's longevity. Mew was originally never going to be included in Red and Green, especially since there wasn't room on the cartridge. But once the debug features were removed towards the end of Red and Green's production, some space was left, so Shigeki Morimoto secretly placed Mew in the game, only to be unlocked at events. But due to a glitch, Mew started appearing in people's games. So Game Freak took advantage of this and announced a legendary offer in CoroCoro magazine. Mew was distributed to 20 of almost 78,000 applicants, but this event sparked a boom in Pokemon sales, bringing Pokemon back into consumers' minds months after it was released, and sales began to rise every week. Mew's discovery allowed fans to understand that there was never a limit to the amount of Pokemon you could encounter. Number 2. The Kanto starters. These three boys, these three hooligans, these three monsters were the face of the franchise. They were on the freaking box, and if they weren't as cool looking as they are, people wouldn't have bought the games. And once they opened the games, if these three didn't look cute or filled with potential, then I don't want to even speak about how this franchise could have turned out. Like I said before, it was super important for the starter Pokemon to look familiar yet fantastical. They couldn't look too intimidating yet couldn't be boring. And we all know that the original trio was the most beloved group of partner Pokemon. The final evolutions of later starter Pokemon weren't super important for Pokemon's popularity, but these three were front and center, so they had to match the aura and power that Pokemon like Lugia, Groudon, and Solgaleo have in order for kids to understand that they were in for an epic journey with some epic beasts. Until this day, it's tradition for starter Pokemon to at least be considered as your favorite Pokemon of all time. And before we reveal the number 1 most important Pokemon of all time, here are some honorable mentions. Pokemon that had some positive influence, whether it be small or huge. Of course, there are even more Pokemon that I won't be mentioning in this video that have left their mark on this franchise, but I'm only human, flesh and blood, born to make mistakes. We got our boy Cubone up in here, one of the few Pokemon in the original games to have some sort of plot or lore. This kinda includes Marowak, I guess, but the mystery and intrigue behind this Pokemon has sparked numerous theories and stories that have allowed Pokemon to constantly be in people's heads due to how vague some of the information is in the game. Pokemon is prime for the picking when it comes to theories, and Cubone helps facilitate the ongoing pool of theories. Eevee was important in the past, but seems to be even more important now. It's one of the few Pokemon whose appeal can be understood by all. Even if you don't like it, you gotta be pretty stubborn to not understand why some people would think it's cute, or at least find its evolution line to be interesting. Eevee helps fans share common ground. Rapidash and Ninetales are here because even though Jigglypuff indicated that girls were also destined to be part of this franchise, that had more to do with Jigglypuff's cuteness. But when it comes to beauty, these two showed that Pokemon didn't have to be badass or cute, they could also be beautiful. Magikarp taught us young fans that you can't judge a book by its cover, and that patience is a virtue. Porygon is here because if that whole seizure debacle happened and there wasn't a Pokemon to blame, Pikachu, whose attack actually caused the seizure-inducing flashes, would have been in serious trouble. And lastly, almost all legendary Pokemon have helped make Pokemon feel legitimate as a story and world. These Pokemon are as valid in gaming, pop culture, and fiction as other epic creatures from other franchises. And last, but the total opposite of least, is the #1 most important Pokemon: Pikachu. It's a perfect mascot and the face of the franchise. There is literally no other Pokemon that could do the job as well as Pikachu does. If you haven't seen my video on the topic of our Pokemon mascot, please click here so I don't have to explain for another 4 minutes as to why Pikachu has helped the franchise more than any other Pokemon. It appeals to boys and girls, it's cute yet fierce, and if Ash would have acquired an actual starter, it would have alienated all the fans that didn't pick the Pokemon Ash did. Even people who haven't played or watched Pokemon know what this thing is, and are glad to see it. Cause Pikachu is a miracle in the form of a friendly electric mouse. And you can be my miracle for leaving a like on this video and subscribing if you haven't. Check the description for all the music I used, the t-shirts I made for you guys, my Patreon where you can donate for some cool rewards like early video access, and make sure to follow me on Twitter, it's super important. I'll see you guys very soon.